At 30,000 feet, even laughter sounds thin, especially when it's coming from your sister. Leona's laugh carried through the cabin, a polished, glassy sound practiced for dinner parties and investors. The kind that says, "I'm winning and you're watching." She was halfway through her third glass of champagne when she leaned toward her husband and whispered, loud enough for the people behind us to hear, "Can you believe they actually let her fly jets?" Our little Cassidy, the toy soldier playing dress-up. The words floated through the pressurized air, weightless and sharp. A few passengers chuckled. Someone glanced back at me, curious, amused, pitying. I didn't flinch. I'd been trained not to. The cabin lights dimmed as the flight attendants began their slow glide down the aisle. Outside, the ocean was black glass, endless. Inside, Leona adjusted her diamond bracelet, perfectly centered for the reflection in the window. She'd always been like that, born to command attention. And I'd always been the shadow, standing just out of her frame. I looked out the window instead, fingers brushing the edge of my worn flight patch stitched into the pocket of my jacket. Beneath it, a small circle of cold metal pressed against my ribs. My father's old Korean War challenge coin. He used to flip it before missions, just once. Heads for luck, tails for courage. I flipped it under the armrest now, quiet and unseen. It landed on tails. The plane shuddered slightly. Turbulence, minor. But then the lights flickered once, twice. The laughter faded. A chime echoed from the cockpit, followed by the flight attendant's voice, tight with something she was trying not to show. "Ladies and gentlemen, if there are any passengers with medical or aviation experience..." Leona rolled her eyes. "Here we go." Some turbulence and they panic. Then came the second announcement. "Captain is unresponsive." The cabin stilled. Every sound, champagne bubbling, a baby stirring, the hum of engines, seemed to pause. I rose without thinking. Years of protocol and training took over where pride had no place. Leona's hand caught my wrist. "Cassidy, don't," she hissed. "You'll embarrass yourself. Sit down." I looked at her, really looked. Perfect hair, perfect control, the same control she'd used to erase me from our father's will. Then I said quietly, "If I sit down, we all die." Her mouth opened, but I was already moving. Down the aisle, past the stairs, past the whispers. The coin in my pocket felt heavier now. Outside the cockpit door, the light glowed red. I took a breath that tasted like metal and stormlight, the kind you only feel before the sky changes forever. And when I knocked once, steady and sure, I knew this was the first sound my sister had ever truly heard from me. People think turbulence is a moment, sudden, violent, over. But real turbulence lingers. It hums in the bones long after the sky looks calm again. That's what growing up with Leona felt like. She was made for spotlight and applause. I was the shadow that framed her. Father used to joke that she inherited his brilliance and I inherited his stubbornness. "At least one of you will make me proud," he'd say, and everyone would laugh. Everyone except me. When I told him I wanted to fly, he didn't argue. He just looked at me the way he looked at weather reports, mildly interested, already thinking of something else. So I left for the Air Force and never looked back. The first time a jet lifted beneath me, the earth fell away like a bad memory. The sky had rules, and for once, I knew them. Then came the mission. Routine until it wasn't. A flash, a scream through the radio, the sky filled with fire. I brought my aircraft home, but I never stopped hearing the static. Sometimes, even now, when a plane changes altitude, my hands tighten around imaginary controls. Sleep doesn't come easy. It waits behind noise. They called it mild PTSD. Manageable. Contained. Until the story leaked. A journalist quoted my classified eval almost word for word. I didn't need to ask how. Leona had found a copy in Father's old records and handed it to the press wrapped in concern. The article called me a risk in the cockpit. The board grounded me, pending review. When I called her, her voice was smooth as glass. "You needed perspective," she said. "You're not saving the world, Cass. You're running from it." For months, I couldn't tell if the trembling I felt was fear or fury. I buried both in flight hours until I could mistake silence for peace. Then Father died. I came home for the funeral, and Leona met me on the steps of the house. She looked impeccable, grief like a well-fitted dress. "He didn't mention you in the will," she said softly, then hesitated. Just long enough for me to see something flicker in her eyes. Maybe regret. Maybe relief. "You've built your own legacy anyway," she added. I almost believed she meant it, but when she turned away, the air between us went cold again. That was the last time we spoke. Now, sitting beside her on that flight, hearing the same laugh that once shaped my silence, I realized the truth. I wasn't angry anymore. Just ready. Years of shame had turned into something steadier, sharper. Because wounds, when they heal right, don't close. They harden into armor. And when the sky starts falling, armor is what keeps you calm. Leona's laughter always carried farther than it should. Even up here, sealed in air thinner than forgiveness, her voice sounded like it had been trained to travel through walls. "Look at her," she told the couple across the aisle, flashing her perfect teeth. "All those years in uniform, and she still can't relax on a plane." Her husband laughed politely. The woman smiled, unsure. I pretended not to hear, staring out the window at the black Atlantic. The moon was reflected in the wing, trembling slightly, as though even the sky didn't want to hold its shape. I counted my breaths. In for 4, out for 6. The old routine from flight school. Calm through control, control through ritual. My father had called it obsession. The Air Force had called it discipline. The seatbelt sign blinked on. A few passengers grumbled. I felt it immediately. The shift in pressure. Subtle but wrong. It was the kind of turbulence that came not from weather, but from warning. Leona smirked. "You'd think the pilot could handle a bump," she said, loud enough for a stranger to agree. The stranger didn't. He just looked out his window and went pale. Then came the first chime. A tone no passenger really hears, too short, too sharp. I saw the purser stiffen in the galley. Her eyes went to the cockpit door, then to the interphone. "Just some turbulence," Leona said. "See? You're fine." But the purser's voice was shaking when the announcement came. "If there are any passengers with medical or aviation experience, please—" The sentence broke off. Then the second announcement came, thinner, clipped. "Captain is unresponsive." The cabin fell still, the air itself listening. Something inside me tightened. The muscle memory that had been waiting for permission. I unbuckled. Leona's hand snapped around my wrist. "Cassidy," she hissed, "don't you dare!" I met her eyes. "If I don't, we're done." I stood. The aisle felt longer than it should have, the hum of engines turning into heartbeat. A little boy in the row ahead watched me stand, eyes wide behind plastic aviator wings pinned to his t-shirt. His mother gripped his hand, then looked up at me. "You can help, can't you?" she whispered. I nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." For the first time that night, someone believed before I'd even started. People stared. Someone reached for a phone, ready to film. I didn't care. The only thing I could hear was the pulse behind my ears, steady and rising. The purser met me halfway, her voice trembling. "Are you—" U.S. Air Force retired. Multi-engine certified, I said. "What's the situation?" Her lips parted in relief. "Cockpit. The captain, he just collapsed." "Then open the door." Inside, the cockpit felt like a heartbeat cut open. Lights blinking, alarms whispering. The first officer was still at the controls, pale but composed, sweat tracing the side of his neck. The captain slumped against his harness, unconscious, mask loose. "I've got him," the FO said. "Vitals shallow, still breathing." I slid into the left seat without thinking, my body remembering what my mind hadn't allowed itself to feel in years. The leather was still warm. My pulse beat in my palms. For a moment, I wasn't in the sky over the Atlantic. I was back in that other cockpit years ago, the one that ended in fire. The memory slammed into me, static in my headset, a call sign cut off mid-word, the smell of hydraulic fluid and something burning. I blinked, forced breath back into rhythm. Not now, not here. The first officer's voice pulled me back. "Autopilot engaged." Drifting. Small oscillation. "Heading? 072. Numbers steadied me. Short, familiar, controllable. I nodded, scanning instruments with the reflex of someone who once lived inside them. System stable. Airspeed holding. But every number on the screen felt like a question, waiting for courage to answer it. The interphone chimed. The purser again. "She's asking for you." The woman in 2A. Of course she was. I grabbed the handset. "Leona?" Her voice came through sugar smooth, public calm over panic. "Cassidy, this isn't the time for you to... whatever it is you're trying to prove. Please." "I'm not proving anything," I said. "I'm flying." The silence that followed wasn't victory. It was recognition. The first time she'd ever had to believe me. I hung up, slow and final. "Cassidy," the first officer said, testing the name like a code. I turned to him. "Let's keep this steady. We divert to Gander. I'll handle comms. You watch the captain." He didn't question it. He saw it in my eyes. The calm that comes when panic burns itself out. Outside, the stars blurred as we banked east. The sky looked like smoke made of light. And as the plane obeyed, something in me unlocked. A door I hadn't realized I'd been holding shut since that mission. The sound of the engines, the weight of the controls, the hum beneath my hands. It was all still mine. That realization hit harder than any turbulence. Because the truth is, I wasn't afraid of crashing. I was afraid of flying again and remembering what it felt like to belong. We leveled. The cabin pressure equalized. Somewhere behind me, people prayed. I glanced over my shoulder, down the narrow aisle. Leona sat perfectly still, her hands folded tight on her lap. Our eyes met for the briefest second, hers wide, unreadable, almost human. For once, she didn't look like the woman who'd won. She looked like someone waiting to be saved. Somewhere in 2A, my sister finally fell silent. The coin was still in my pocket, its edge warm now, not cold. I didn't need to flip it anymore. For once, I knew which side I was on. For a moment, all I could hear was breath. Mine, the engines, the world's. And I thought, maybe this was what forgiveness really sounded like. The first rule in crisis isn't control, it's clarity. The jet had stopped fighting me, but the sky hadn't decided if it forgave us yet. The hum of the engine steadied like a heartbeat trying to remember its rhythm. "Gander approach on standby," the first officer said, voice rough. He'd rolled his sleeves up, knuckles white on the checklist. "Weather's moving in." "Then we move faster." My tone came out lower than I expected. Measured, clipped. The voice of someone who'd been here before, even if no one believed it yet. I checked the horizon. Cloud bands rolled ahead like slow bruises. Wind shear warnings blinked amber. Somewhere below that darkness was a stretch of Canadian coastline no wider than a whisper, and 300 lives depending on whether I could read wind the way my father used to read people. Leona's laughter, long gone now, lingered in memory like static. I pushed it away and focused on what I could control. Altitude, airspeed, the feel of the column in my hands. We began the descent, smooth, slow. I could almost feel the aircraft listening, heavy, reluctant, but listening. "Talk to me," I said to the first officer. "Run me through emergency sequence for incapacitated pilot." He exhaled, steadier now. "Autopilot primary. Secondary hydraulic backup verified. Manual control if we lose pressure." "Good," I said. "You'll handle comms." "I'll fly. We're diverting to Gander. We'll need at least 7,000 feet clear. The crosswind's ugly, so we'll bring her down firm." He nodded, something like relief flickering behind his exhaustion. He'd stopped questioning my authority a long time ago. Then came the voice I wasn't expecting, soft, from the doorway. The purser. "Captain," she said, hesitating, as if the word itself might be wrong. "Passengers are calm, for now. But they're asking for updates. Tell them we're landing safely. No drama, no heroics." Her eyes softened. "Yes, ma'am." When she closed the door, the cockpit became small again. 2 people, 1 machine, 1 decision left to make. It's strange, the way fear behaves up here. On the ground, it shouts. In the sky, it whispers. Every part of me wanted to check the captain again, to confirm he was still breathing. But training said, "Focus forward." So I did. The flight controls trembled, not from turbulence, from memory. My hands remembered too much. The night over Kandahar, the friend I couldn't save, the silence after. I thought I'd buried that part of me. Turns out, buried things still breathe when the air gets thin enough. "Cassidy?" The FO's voice broke through. "You good?" I blinked once. "I'm here." My right hand adjusted the yoke. Small correction, steady pressure, muscle over memory. I'd done it 1,000 times before takeoff. This time, it wasn't habit. It was reclamation. The plane didn't need to obey the past, and neither did I. He nodded. "Then we're good." That small sentence, so simple, felt like oxygen. It was the first time in years someone had said "we" to me without irony. We dropped another 1,000 feet. The cockpit lights dimmed to night setting. The airspeed indicators held steady, and the first glimmer of coastline appeared, a jagged silver in the dark. "Approach vector established," the FO said. "Copy." I studied the angle, mentally tracing descent slope. It wasn't perfect. Too high, too close. We'll need a short field landing. His eyes widened slightly. On a 777? First time for everything. I had nothing left to protect. Not reputation, not inheritance, not his approval. All I had were these hands, this sky, and the craft that still remembered me. Fear was noise. I'd learned to fly through noise. We exchanged half a smile, the kind pilots use to stay human. I reached down and tapped the pocket where the coin rested. I didn't flip it, just needed to feel its weight. For once, it wasn't about luck. It was about balance. We went through landing prep like prayer, flaps, spoilers, hydraulics, gear. The plane groaned at each command, as if arguing, but obeyed. Somewhere behind me, the cabin lights dimmed. I could imagine the boy from before still clutching his toy wings. I hoped he'd never have to earn real ones this way. Tower confirms runway 32 available, the FO said. Crosswind at 15, gusting. I nodded. We'll take it. The radio crackled again. Gander Tower, be advised, ground emergency services standing by. My pulse thudded once. I pictured flashing lights, stretchers, news cameras, all the noise waiting for us on the ground. Noise I couldn't afford to think about. Focus on airspeed. Focus on angle. Checklist complete, the FO said. Then let's do what we came here for. He looked at me sideways. You mean land or survive? Both, I said. The descent smoothed out. For the first time since the announcement, the cockpit was quiet. That deep, fragile quiet before the next test. I looked out through the windshield. The first lights of Newfoundland were flickering ahead, faint as old memories. I thought of my father, of every time he'd dismissed my choices with a wave of his hand. I wondered if he would have understood this. The daughter he'd erased, holding the world steady above the ocean. Probably not, but I didn't need him to. I needed to land this plane. And in that single thought, the plan became simple. Not survival, not redemption, just precision. Because precision was peace. I exhaled slowly, palm firm on the controls. The metal hummed beneath my skin, steady, alive. For the first time in years, I didn't need a witness. I believed myself, and that was enough to land anything. The descent began like every descent, smooth, procedural, rational. But this one carried ghosts. The air itself seemed to remember what I'd tried to forget. We'd dropped below 10,000 feet. The clouds had thickened into bruises. The plane trembled, not from failure, but from resistance, as if it didn't trust me yet. The windshield wipers flicked uselessly at rain that refused to move aside. Flaps 20, I said. Set, the first officer answered. His voice was steady now, reverent almost. Through the glass, I could see nothing but dark. No stars, no horizon. Only the faint shimmer of lightning reflecting off the wing. For a second, my pulse faltered. The sound of the engines became the sound of that other night, the night I'd flown through fire and heard my wingman's last breath dissolve into static. It came back so sharply I could smell the fuel, the smoke. I forced my jaw to unclench, breathing through it. Not tonight, I whispered. I adjusted the yoke, just a hair, the same motion that had once kept me alive over Kandahar. This time, it was more than muscle memory. It was reclamation. The jet obeyed. The trembling softened. The sky relented by inches. Cassidy, the first officer said quietly, "You've got this." The words cut through the fog like a flare. No one had said them to me in years, not as belief, only as mockery. But now they were real. They landed. I nodded once, eyes never leaving the horizon. "Gear down." The sound thundered through the fuselage. Behind me, passengers must have felt it. The vibration under their feet, the whisper of metal preparing for contact. I pictured the boy with the toy wings. Maybe he was still watching, still believing. "Speed check," I said. 150 knots, stable. Good. The radio hissed to life. "Gander Tower, winds 20 from the northwest, gusting 28. You're clear to land runway 32, 28 knots. Crosswind. Not ideal." I looked at the FOZO. "We'll take it." He didn't argue. He'd stopped arguing hours ago. The plane began its final turn toward the runway, descending through layers of mist so thick it looked like descending through memory. Every second stretched, elastic with fear and focus. 5,000, he called out. "Copy." Then, faint through the cockpit door, I heard something impossible. Applause. Not loud, just a few claps, scattered, awkward, human. Passengers cheering not for safety, but for faith. Someone must have told them I was military. Someone must have believed it meant something. Leona would hate that, and the thought made me smile. For years, she'd measured me by what I couldn't do, by what I'd failed to become. She'd taken my name, my story, my father's memory, and rewrote it until I was a ghost. But ghosts, when cornered, learn to haunt back. I wasn't flying for her, but I'd be damned if I didn't let her see what survival looked like. 3,000, said the FO. Rain streaked across the windshield like scratches in the dark. The runway lights appeared and vanished, flickering ghosts in the storm. My hands stayed steady. The FO whispered, "You sure about this angle?" "I'm sure about me." The phrase felt like a blade, clean and perfect. We broke through the last of the clouds. Below, the outline of land, black and glistening. A string of lights carved through the darkness like a promise. "Flaps 30. Set." The controls grew heavy, but predictable. The aircraft began to settle into its descent path, an enormous bird surrendering to gravity with grace. 200 feet. The autopilot beeped its warning. I disengaged it with a click. The yoke vibrated under my palms, alive. I heard the FO inhale sharply. "You're going manual?" "I always land my own plane." He didn't speak again. He just watched. Wyn slammed the fuselage from the left, a violent shove. The plane tilted. My instincts took over. Rudder right, aileron left, hold the pitch. The runway twisted in my vision, then snapped back into line. Warning tone, yoke trembling. My breath broke into counts. 2 seconds to correction. 1. "Steady," said the FO. The wind disagreed. Altitude dropping. 50 feet. 30. No time for thought. Only muscle. The cabin screamed. Metal roared. Something loose clattered behind us. Then contact. "Easy," said the FO. "I am." Inside, I wasn't. My heart thundered so hard I could feel it in my teeth. But my hands were steady, the one truth that still obeyed me. 50 feet. The ground surged upward. For a second, the noise vanished. Just my breath and the engines and the weight of 1,000 choices. Then we touched. A kiss of rubber and storm. Then the roar. Tires screaming, reversers opening, the body of the plane shuddering as friction replaced flight. We rolled, slowing, until finally, silence. "Speed brakes deployed," said the FO, voice shaking with relief. I didn't answer. I just listened to the engines winding down, the rain ticking against metal. I'd never loved silence so much. It wasn't the kind that punishes. It was the kind that forgives. I unclipped my harness, stood, legs trembling from adrenaline. "Nice work, Captain," the FO said. That word, Captain, landed harder than any touchdown. It wasn't rank anymore. It was recognition. Through the narrow gap in the cockpit door, I saw passengers turning to each other, crying, praying, laughing. Relief makes people look holy. And then, her. Leona stood halfway down the aisle. Her hair, perfect at takeoff, clung to her face in damp strands. She was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Our eyes met. No words. Just the long, quiet shock of truth finally arriving. For a heartbeat, there was no victory, no hierarchy. Just two daughters of the same man, stripped of everything except breath. I saw her not as the rival who took everything, but as a mirror I'd finally outgrown. Her expression flickered. Defiance, disbelief, something else I couldn't name. Maybe fear, maybe respect. She raised a trembling hand as if to reach for balance. I raised none. In that silence, the whole power dynamic of a lifetime inverted. For the first time, she needed me. And I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. Emergency lights blinked outside, red and blue streaks washing the rain-soaked windows, crew voices over radios, the mechanical sigh of doors unlocking. I reached into my pocket. The coin was there, my father's, the one he used to flip before every decision. It was warm now. I didn't need to turn it. The answer was already made. I pressed it flat against the console before me, leaving it there. A small circle of metal and history, resting against everything I'd survived. I took one last breath in that cockpit. The air still smelled of adrenaline and ozone and redemption. When I stepped out, the purser met my eyes, tears on her cheeks. "You saved us," she said softly. "No," I said. "We saved each other." The passengers began to clap again, a wave of sound rising through the narrow cabin. I didn't turn to face them. I let the sound pass through me, wind through an open canopy. Because this wasn't about applause. This was about landing the one thing that had always felt out of reach, myself. And for the first time in my life, I was home. I walked past Leona without a word. Outside, through the glass, the first blade of sunlight broke across the wet runway. Thin, golden, almost shy. The storm was already forgetting us. They said the footage went viral before we even touched down. A passenger's phone had caught the chaos, the smoke, the shouts, the sudden calm when I took the mic and said, "This is Captain Wyn. We're going to be all right." The world wanted a hero. What they got was a woman who'd spent half her life trying to believe that sentence herself. The days that followed blurred into debriefings and headlines. Pilot saves 300 lives. Air Force captain defies odds. And then, inevitably, Wyn family scandal reignited. Leona tried to manage it, called press conferences, smiled in pearls, painted herself as the loyal sister so proud of Cassidy's courage. But truth has its own gravity. When investigators dug into the airline's records, they found the leaks, the falsified documents, the offshore accounts tied to our father's estate. Leona's name appeared in every file. I didn't testify against her. I didn't have to. Sometimes silence, the same weapon once used to bury me, becomes a mirror that makes the guilty speak. Leona was waiting outside that hearing, not the polished Leona of fundraisers and pearls, just a woman holding a paper cup of coffee she hadn't touched. She didn't say much, only this: "You did what you always said you could." I met her eyes. There was no bitterness left in them, just fatigue, maybe even a little pride. "We both survived," I said. It wasn't forgiveness, it was something quieter, acknowledgement. And maybe that was enough. The federal board cleared me of every question about mental fitness. My file was restored, my wings reinstated. That night, before the hearing, I dreamed of him, my father. We were in the old hangar behind our house, the one that smelled of oil and sawdust. I was 8, holding the wrench wrong, trying to copy his movements. "You can't force precision," he'd said. "You have to earn it." Back then, I thought he meant engines. Now I knew he meant love. In the dream, he didn't speak. He just handed me the coin, same one I'd carried through every mission, every failure, every mile of sky. When I looked up again, he was gone. But the light stayed. Maybe that was all he'd ever meant to give. The weight, the challenge, the silence that dares you to fill it with your own voice. And I finally had. When I walked out of that hearing room, flashbulbs flared. Reporters shouted my name. I didn't look at any of them. I just looked up, at the clean stretch of sky above the courthouse, empty and endless. That was the first time in years it didn't feel like judgment. It felt like invitation. Months later, I stood on a tarmac in Arizona, heat rising off the asphalt, a hangar behind me with a new sign that read, "The Wynflight Institute." The logo, a single wing curved into an open circle, had been sketched from memory, a symbol Major Gina Stone once painted on her helmet before deployment. I'd named the main simulator after her. I'd named the scholarships after the women who came before her, and before me. The first group of cadets arrived that morning. 12 young women, nervous, bright, every one of them holding on to the same impossible dream I once did. Among them was a girl with the same sharp eyes as my sister, Morgan, Leona's daughter. She hesitated at the edge of the hangar, uncertain if she belonged. I recognized that look. I'd worn it most of my life. When she reached me, she whispered, "Mom said I'd understand you better if I learned to fly." I smiled, small, real. "Then let's start there." I handed her a headset and pointed toward the simulator. Lesson 1. The sky doesn't care who you're related to. It only listens to hands that don't give up. She nodded. That was enough. As she climbed into the cockpit, I felt the same hum I'd once felt on that transatlantic flight. The rhythm of engines, the echo of courage. I walked out onto the runway, heat shimmering around me. A gust of wind rolled across the desert, warm and dry, carrying the faint smell of jet fuel. I reached into my pocket. The coin was gone. I'd left it in the cockpit that night. Good. Some legacies belong to the past. In its place was a patch, frayed, sun-bleached, stitched with my own call sign, Ghostbird. It wasn't meant to look new. It was meant to look survived. I pinned it to my sleeve. For the first time, I didn't measure myself in anyone's reflection, not my sister's envy, not my father's approval. I was enough, exactly as I was, standing in my own light. Above me, a training jet soared, a clean arc across the blue, sunlight flashing off its wings. I smiled, not at the sky, not at the memory of my father, not even at redemption, just at the simple, stunning fact that I was still here, alive, unburied, unshaken. I didn't need anyone to see it. I'd already landed. Sometimes freedom isn't loud. It's the quiet that comes after the storm, when you finally stop asking to be seen. If you believe strength means rising quietly above the people who try to break you, subscribe for more stories of courage, redemption, and silent triumph.